Sorry the wait. So my name is Gabriel O'Flaherty-Chan. I'm an iOS developer at Shopify, and today I'm going to be just talking about a small project I worked on recently, which was a GameBoy emulator for the Apple Watch, which I'm calling Giovanni, after the main bad dude from the original Pokemon series. I just kind of chose this character because I use this game a lot for testing, and it seemed to make sense. So here's kind of what it looks like. So I did a pretty big write-up of some of the technical challenges of the project online. But rather than just kind of reiterate everything I wrote down, I'm going to try and just hit some of the main points and then also talk about some of the reception I got from this project after publishing everything. So it works fairly well. I've played about an hour and 10 minutes of Pokemon Silver so far. And yeah. So it kind of all starts with this project called Provenance. For those of you who have been involved in the emulation community, it's an open source iOS front end for, an open source emulator front end for iOS and Apple TV, which supports a bunch of different things. Supports all kinds of Nintendo emulator, Nintendo platforms, Atari and Sega, and basically everything. It even has an Apple TV app. It's a super mature project, and when I originally came into this, I was thinking, hey, I've worked with Provenance in the past. It makes sense to build on top of Provenance. But the more I began extending Provenance to kind of see if this was even possible, the more I realized I didn't really need a lot of the stuff that Provenance was offering, and I kind of ended up kind of peeling off layers until I realized I only actually need the GameBoy emulator that Provenance uses, which is this thing called Gambat. So a quick aside. I'm just going to quickly go over the architecture of how watch apps work. So your watch app communicates with your iOS app over this thing called watch connectivity, which is this high-level kind of networking framework that Apple provides for having the two communicate over Bluetooth. So the way I designed the watchOS app is that it's kind of like your watch app says to your iPhone, hey, send me some games. And then your iPhone says, OK, and sends you a list of games, which would be stored locally. Your watch app then responds with, OK, give me this game, when the user selects something. And then iOS then sends over the binary file, which is then loaded into Gambat, which I'll now talk about. So Gambat is a really cool project. It's like super old. It's been around for 10 plus years. It's all in GitHub, actually, and the latest commit was like 10 years ago. It's all in C++. It supports Game Boy and Game Boy Color. It's pretty powerful on its own and pretty high level, so you don't really need to know that much about emulation in order to use it. It's basically like you plug in the binary file, and it gives you bytes out. Am I getting feedback? Out of the box, it comes with save state and load state supports, and even this thing called GameShark, which is this weird tech from the late 90s, which I'm sure you're probably aware of this, is this weird tech which I don't think Nintendo ever approved of, which was used for cheating. So that was kind of funny that Gambit comes with GameShark. The way I structured the project was because I kind of want to do as much as possible in Swift. I ended up writing the whole client in Swift and then writing a very thin wrapper on top of Gambat in Objective-C++. So this allowed me to basically do all UI work in Swift. And then when I finally had my game and I wanted to play it, I basically passed it into my wrapper, the game core. And that would basically do all of the heavy work and configuration and setup and communication with Gambat. And once Gambat is ready, it basically comes back to your wrapper, and the wrapper goes back to Swift and says, here, render this stuff. So my options for rendering were pretty limited when I first started working on this. For some reason, I made the assumption that I would get OpenGLES supports on watchOS. I don't have that. because SceneKit and SpriteKit were recently added to watchOS, I kind of assumed that also maybe gets something metal related. Unfortunately, none of that stuff is exposed. So my options were kind of limited to core graphics, or some core graphics, and some SpriteKit and SceneKit. And so I originally began investigating how this would work with core graphics. At this point, I kind of recalled an article written by some of the guys from Facebook who ported Doom to watchOS. And they were pretty extensive in writing about what technologies they chose and what techniques to use. And as it turns out, they also use core graphics because they probably ran into these same roadblocks. And what they're doing is basically rendering to a UI image and then applying that to the watchOS equivalent of a UI image view many times per second. So I basically started off with that approach, which works sufficiently well. It requires very low code. You basically create a core graphics context with some information about what your video buffer looks like, some information about like what the shape and form of pixels, and you basically plug that in, use that to create a UI image, and you update that many times per second. This worked really well at first. It allowed me to get something on screen very quickly. Some of the drawbacks were that performance wasn't really great, especially on older devices. I had to kind of crank up the frame skip pretty sufficiently, which made it kind of difficult to play. So one of the approaches I took right afterwards was actually using SpriteKit instead. And that actually worked super great and was super performant. It works similar to core graphics in that you just take your video buffer, you plug it into a SpriteKit texture, and you configure the SpriteKit texture with some similar type of information about pixel order and the length of the buffer. Then you create a texture out of that, and you then update a SpriteKit sprite node many times per second. So I'm going to talk about input now. So from the original Game Boy, I basically had 8 controls to port over. If you look at the real estate you have on watchOS, minus an area for video, you basically have the digital crown and then a tiny little sliver along the bottom. So I guess like what I could have done was take all 8 buttons and cram them into the bottom. I didn't do this. This would have probably ended up in people trying to hit 1 button and hitting 5. Something else I could have done was also doing what the Doom guys did and just overlay buttons on the screen. This wouldn't have been very nice either because obviously you're blocking a lot of your screen and the buttons are kind of arbitrarily positioned and laid out on the screen. So I kind of decided to take an approach that was in between both and add a pattern gesture recognizer instead to the screen, which allowed me to eliminate 4 of the buttons off the bottom right off the bat. And it actually felt surprisingly comfortable being able to pan and swipe on top of the video. I guess you also still block some of the video, but it's better than having a bunch of small buttons. As I began playing with this, it became apparent that I'm probably like being dramatic about this, but panning and dragging on the video and then going down to the 8 button was actually very cumbersome, as it may seem. So I ended up instead just removing the A button and adding a tap gesture recognizer, which actually ended up working really great. One of the big issues I found with this solution was that because this isn't a native touch interface, there's no immediate visual feedback at all. And so what I found really helped was adding this tiny little thing at the bottom left, which would basically light up to indicate which inputs were being provided. So the A button would light up when you tap the screen, and that little dot would turn to arrows. So that's kind of like, those are the main technical challenges of this project. I'm going to kind of talk about how, like, some of the media reception I received from this project. So I mentioned I wrote a short article about the whole process. This year I've been trying to get into a better habit of better talking and promoting the stuff I've been working on, just to kind of better reflect on some of the things I learned from my side projects. So I wrote a short article about the whole thing. I shared to a few social networks with recommendations from coworkers. I submitted to Pokemon gaming emulation subreddits. The submissions to the Pokemon subreddits didn't really work. It was removed like immediately because of the auto moderator not liking emulation, I guess. I don't know. The submissions to the gaming subreddits was also buried almost immediately. It got like 2 upvotes and then it was gone forever. Also, like the score wasn't like 80% or whatever. It was like obvious that a lot of people were also downvoting. So I don't know how Reddit works. I submitted to the emulation subreddits. It did a little better. It got like 100 upvotes, but then after like an hour, it was like gone. So all in all, it was like a bit of a disappointing process. So I got some advice from a coworker for ways to like maximize on your Hacker News karma. And so like apparently there's a lot of like there's a lot of things you can do to apparently like game it. So like not using URL shorteners and then like not sharing a permalink and then like making sure people upvote from like a data network. So I ended up getting like 8 or 9 upvotes like after a very short period of time. Although I noticed as soon as I stopped getting upvotes, the post kind of like dropped immediately and was off the newest page very quickly. So that was kind of a bust. When I shared to Twitter, I made sure to make sure my site was like set up with rich Twitter previews and made sure all the metadata was there. I made sure to share GIFs because apparently those are good for engagements. I even got some retweets from some pretty high-profile accounts. All in all, though, I noticed that's the only attention I was getting on the tweet was like from coworkers and friends and my sister. So like it didn't really work out. So like at this point, I was also working remotely from the other side of the world, and this was Friday night for me. At this point, I was kind of like happy that I had shared everything and was finished with the project and was ready to move on to the next thing. But when I woke up to like a billion notifications on my phone because apparently Polygon had picked up the story. So this was like huge because I've never seen something like this before. So that ended up in like a huge amount of traffic on my site. Probably doesn't look like that much, but it was more than I've ever received on my personal sites. Traffic kind of died down by Sunday. And by Sunday night, I was kind of thinking like, I was like really happy with how the whole thing had turned out. And I was just like prepping for like the next thing to work on. Monday EST rolled around, and then the story ended up getting picked up by like every single worthwhile tech blog, which I thought was crazy. So that resulted in like traffic. Yeah, so like it was actually kind of interesting that the narrative kind of turned from like me making a GameBoy emulator for the Apple Watch to like me making Pokemon for the Apple Watch. I totally didn't make Pokemon. Nonetheless, it was like really cool. I thought this was like a bit unnecessary of a title. I thought this was kind of a funny comment though. So like this resulted in like traffic like doubling one more time. What ended up happening like the next day was someone like I ended up getting a huge amount of traction actually on the gadget subreddit. So who would have thought? It's a default subreddit with like a huge number of subscribers, and like it got a huge amount of attention, like lots of funny comments. So that resulted in traffic like doubling one more time, which is like bananas. At that point, it ended up like going like international and getting translated into all kinds of different languages, like French and German and Russian and Chinese, and basically a lot of the big ones. I found this particular story funny because this Hong Kong blog posted a story about this thing. I ended up sending this to my cousin in Hong Kong, who came back to me with this, which I thought was really funny. And I thought he was kind of like bullshitting me, and before I end up translating that part, and then it told me like this. So I thought that was really funny. Nothing makes you feel more like a foreign godman than like this kind of spam and shit that I got to basically every single one of my social network channels. A lot of people kind of like begging me to just give this to them somehow for free. Like a lot of people ask me to put this on like Cydia and stuff, and I don't even know how to do that. But a lot of people not really wanting to play Pokemon, which is like really cool. To this day, my mentions are ruined actually because of this kind of thing. So my biggest takeaways from this whole project, I would say, keep your MVP as focused as possible. I spent a lot of time trying to make this work with provenance. I didn't need this to work with provenance. I don't care about provenance. I really only wanted to know if I could make a GameBoy emulator for the Apple Watch, and only after when I ditched provenance was I actually able to do that. I would say the internet is very unpredictable and ungameable. Maybe it's gameable, but I don't know. I was like presented with these like surefire ways of like hacking Hacker News. They totally didn't work. None of the stuff that works, but who would have thought? I didn't tip off Polygon or anything. It just kind of took off on its own. So very unpredictable. And then I would say nostalgia is super crazy. As you can probably tell from last year's Pokemon Go debacle, people are like willing to play like a half-broken game if it has like Pokemon in it. You're seeing a lot of this stuff nowadays. Like if you watch South Park, like Member Berries, like Star Wars, like it's crazy. So like I think there's a huge untapped market, or maybe people are just tapping into it now. Yeah, something to think about. So if you're interested in learning more about this project or contributing to it, it's on my GitHub under Giovanni. And if you want information, you can follow me on Twitter. And also stick around because I have a bunch of stickers too.